about Tony Ferguson to me, Ryan, is that it wasn't like gradual. It wasn't like a gradual decline. It was like he got to the edge of a cliff and just fell off the cliff.
Yep.
It was Justin Gaethje, and then that was it. The moment he was done with that interim title fight, he wasn't as good. Now, granted, he lost to Beneil Dariush and Charles Oliveira. So you go,
Yes.
well, he's fighting the best in the world.
He is.
But now we got to see him fight Nate Diaz, who's not the best in the world right now. Nate will tell you he's the best in the world. But he didn't do great against Nate. He landed the inside leg kicks, a lot of inside leg kicks. But if you fought Nate Diaz or watched him fight, you know that's how you beat him. That's why Conor, even though he got carried out of the octagon in the rematch, was able to win because he just kept kicking the front leg of Diaz. Ferguson he just does not seem to have it anymore, but he does not seem to have the self-awareness to understand it. You know, he just doesn't really want to walk away from the game, and I get it. It's hard to walk away, but he just doesn't have it anymore, man. And I honestly don't know who the UFC can match him up with anymore, because if he'd have fought Li Jingliang, he would have lost to him.
Yes.
And it would have probably been worse because Lee would have hit him with big shots early. So I just don't know who they could match this guy up with anymore.
So, if you don't know what this means, which is why, I think you're here, I'm gonna tell you right now. I'm gonna tell you what Nate Diaz said and why he said that. And if, once you understand, you might just give him a pat on the back. But so DC was talking major smack. Now, if you don't know what the tweet was, Nate Diaz said, "Respect your OG, you fat motherfucker." Damn. Now I've never seen him do this, especially to somebody that's like highly respected in MMA, that's done incredible things like DC. And then he sent this image of DC crying in the John Jones fight, after one of the John Jones fight. And for DC, that John Jones fight is very, very personal for him. He hated DC. I mean, he hated John Jones. But it wasn't actually a still image. It had music. Kind of like an album, And then I hit unmute, and then I just hear the N-word blasted right into my headphones. And it was playing. I can't actually tell you the lyrics, but that was spicy. That was really, really spicy. And DC was talking major smack in the DC and RC show in about right after the 209. Like, they do this DC and RC show where he's joined by his friend RC, Ryan Clark, and then they're paid by ESPN to do that show. They make a ton of money off of it. Not enough, as they were saying, but they were talking about Tony Ferguson. And Tony Ferguson was, a lot of people like DC, after that fight, they were talking about how Tony's done, and I think a lot of people think that this tweet is respect your OG, and that quote-unquote OG is Nathan Diaz. And I don't think that, because while DC talked smacked about Diaz in the DC and RC show, he also gave him props, because he was the man, he was the winner that night. So he did give him props. So I think it is Tony Ferguson. And when they were talking about Tony Ferguson, they were talking about how Tony Ferguson's done, and he's not really aware that he's done, and all those type of things. And to me, that's a bit harsh, because when guys step up, when you hit them up, when you ring their phone, when you lit the bat signal up, and when they step up, when they show up to save the day, you give those guys a pat on the back. But DC doesn't think so. He gave him a really, really harsh smack in the back. And when DC said that, I really didn't agree. Because I feel as though... Oh my... Hey. Because I feel as though guys like, you know, like Tony Ferguson, Cody Garbrandt, Dominic Cruz, those guys that are, you know, that were on the highest of highs and then now they're on the lowest of lows. I feel as though those guys could still reinvent themselves and could still really win fights. But obviously that isn't the case right now for Tony Ferguson. And DC believes that he is done. But he doesn't believe he's done, which is the problem for Tony. I mean, don't get it wrong here. DC just wants Tony to be over with the sport because he doesn't want to see somebody, a legend like Tony, get hurt. Right? And I understand that. But he did it in a way that really opposes to what Tony believes in, which is that he's still in the game, that he could still perform and, you know, win fights. And the problem is, that's not really the case, just like what we've seen in UFC 209. I mean, 279, right? Somebody that believes that they can still win, and they don't. And DC just said it as it is, that he's not gonna win anymore, it's over for him, and he's done. While I don't agree with it, it's what's happening. It's what's happening. It can be stopped, but it is what's happening. And he wasn't wrong to say that. Although, he is wrong because he's in a position where it's not too late for Tony. And he's wrong because Tony stepped up. When the bat signal was lit, he's the one that showed up. He's the one that saved the day. He's the one that saved the main event. He gave us a better fight. And he did Nate a massive favor by not making it competitive. Right? Like when Nate was playing around, when he was not really, you know, when he was walking to a, you know, near the cage, and he was playing. And Tony engaged with that horseplay. You know, he played back with him. And that just tells me that he didn't make it competitive. And that's fine because, you know, we were happy that it wasn't competitive. Because if it was competitive, I mean, we were happy that Nate didn't bleed for the first time. That we didn't see Nate, after a 4th round fight, bloodied up and bruised. No, he was good. You know, we loved that instead of him walking out of the UFC with a frown, that we saw him with a smile, without any blood and bruises. And we appreciated that from Tony Ferguson. But Daniel Cormier grilled him. He grilled him. And Nate returned the favor by saying, "Respect your OG, you fat motherfucker." He said that to Daniel Cormier because Nate Diaz is the only guy that can say that without receiving backlash. That he's the only guy that will, you know, that can say that to somebody as respected as DC and just receive some oohs and ahs and not get, you know, not get some boos and boss. That doesn't work. But he returned the favor. You know, he stood up for Nate Diaz when nobody ever did. I mean, guys like Chael Sonnen come to mind. He stood up for Nate Diaz. for Tony Ferguson. He said that Tony Ferguson, he stepped up, you know, and we can't grill him for that. We can't put all these comments. I'm telling you right now, some of those tweets, those fighters can see that, and it can affect them. And I know that that they look strong and they have this mental fortitude. Sometimes they're happy, it's their it's their kid's birthday. They check on Instagram, they post something, and they're in a good mood. They scroll through Twitter, and they see all these comments. They can see that sometimes. And for Nate Diaz, he took the liberty to stand up for Tony when nobody did. He returned that favor, because he was in the right position. And Tony talked back, but he didn't receive the headlines. He didn't receive a reply from Daniel Cormier. But there's only one man that can do that, and that's Nate Diaz. And I feel as though he did do Tony a favor here. He did sort of give back that respect, because Tony gave him a favor and he just returned it. And this was great. I like this, because Tony's one of those guys that I really like. Like no matter what they do moving forward, he will be my favorite fighter of all time. My favorite fighter is different from my favorite fighter of all time. My favorite fighter of all time doesn't change no matter what they do moving on. They murder several children, I don't care. They kidnap the president, I don't care. They're going to be my favorite fighter of all time. Now, my favorite fighter is different. That can change. But Tony deserves that respect. He's always deserved that respect. He didn't just... This wasn't the only time where the bat signal was lit and he was there. This wasn't the only time. He did this in the middle of a pandemic. In the middle of a pandemic where nobody was gonna watch him, where nobody was gonna see and get entertained in front of him. Rarely do you see an interim champion actually go and fight while they're the interim champion. Mostly they just hold on to that like they're a koala. They just cling on to that and they're gonna wait for the title shot. But he saved sports, like he said. Now I'm not gonna deny that, because he's the one that headlined a fight card in the middle of a pandemic when nobody wanted to and nobody could. He's the one that headlined that card, and he did it for us. He didn't have to. That was not good career management. But then he stepped up. The bat signal was lit, he was there. And I feel as though Tony deserves that respect. He deserves to be in my favorite fighter of all time. He deserves people on Twitter to be giving him all the nice, funny and sweet emojis. He deserves those. And he doesn't deserve this treatment from Daniel Cormier. He deserves this respect your OG, you fat motherfucker, from Nate Diaz. He does. Because he's somebody that was there when he was needed. And that, to me, he deserves some respect. Like, and DC just replied, Nathan, relax. And I feel as though he also doesn't know what the whole thing was, like who the quote-unquote OG was in this situation. And I think it's Tony. I think it is. because Tony is somebody that really deserves respect. You know, because he's always given us entertainment. You know, and this from Nate Diaz is Nate Diaz giving that favor back, because he's the only one that could. He's the only one that could say that to DC and not receive backlash. And I appreciate that from Nathan Diaz. But yeah, I mean, this was just nasty, by the way. This was respect your OG, fat mother, like, nasty. Anyway, yeah. Now you know. The more you know, the better, I guess.